Hello, so this presentation outlines areas of strengths and weaknesses I identified in the previous assignments where I analysed a basketball player. It will include summaries from all the research such as I went through and will present conclusions and development plans to build on these weaknesses with targets which I made from the information I collected. So the considerations for giving feedback are very important because it can be the difference between someone actually working towards it and then them not working on it. So it's important to have honesty when you're giving it because it helps you relate with the player a bit more and they'll believe you if you're being honest. So the best way to do this is use the sandwich technique of saying something positive and positive and then something negative and then another positive one, because it outweighs the negative and it will make them feel better and it will soften the blow if the honest opinion is quite harsh. The experience of the athlete needs to be considered because elite athletes, they'll probably require harsher feedback, which pick on tiny little details, whereas beginners, this would be so ineffective because they'd just give up. So you need to have refined feedback and prioritise the weaknesses to work on. So there's not too much being given to them, which makes them feel like it's unachievable and they'll become demotivated. The type of feedback needs to be considered because if there's a lot of information which looks at loads of specifics, it might be better for it to be written down as well as verbally explained so if the athlete doesn't understand what the information is about, they can ask questions and then they also don't have to remember it all. Methods of improvement is important to be given as well. This can be in the form of a development plan or targets, and just because it will ensure the motivation remains and the athlete doesn't give up. The age of the athlete has to be looked at because generally younger people will be less likely to take criticism. They haven't got experience of it in the world, whereas older people, they'll probably be much better at it, so just approach younger athletes a bit more carefully. Gender also needs to be considered because generally women are more likely to get upset from harsh criticism, so they need to be approached more carefully than what you would a men, I guess. But in relation to gender and age, if anyone is in a bad emotional state and having a hard time, then it's so important to make sure their feedback has been carefully considered and everything they're going through isn't affected negatively by you giving them more feedback. It might just be worth waiting until they feel better to give it to them, maybe. Confidentiality is a very big factor. All feedback and data collected must be confidential, and all data must be protected by a password or locked in a cupboard, and only shared with the coach and the athlete. This is because of legal requirements and data protection. Also, athletes don't want you going talking about them to other people. It's just not fair. Giving feedback is also more effective if you reference evidence when giving it. So this can be comparing it to group averages, but obviously not individual player data, or using footage or pictures taken just to highlight where they went wrong, and this will just make it clearer to the athlete where they need to improve and what they need to do to improve. This section just presents the conclusions made from the data collected in notational analysis. So I just collected stats and I made a table and I've compared my player tabby to the group averages in there. On the right, we've got the table with all the stats in it, and on the left, we've got a schematic where I measured the movements of tabby in the game. The successes and failures have been highlighted. The successes are in green and the weaknesses remain in white, and these points are later explained in a summary table when in later with all the other data in it. I need to just highlight that you have to consider that my player didn't actually receive the ball a lot, and this wasn't for any apparent reason. She was playing with boys who really wanted to pass to each other, and so when I'm looking at it, when I'm analysing it, I'm just kind of making sure that I'm not being too harsh, because if she'd been playing with an all-girl environment, she might have received the ball more and had better stats. I believe the most important weakness to improve on out of this data collected is going to be the 2-point shot. This is because it's one of the most common shots used in a game, and by improving her stats for it, she'd be using more scoring opportunities for her team, and because she's scoring more, other team won't be turning the ball over and getting rebounds, which they can then score from. So here's the section from the technical model review. This is when I analysed my player doing a box out, and I collected all the strengths and weaknesses and all the phases for that. So the strengths are in green and the weaknesses are in white. I think the most important weakness which she needs to improve on is going to be something to do with the strength in her legs. This would just allow her to withstand more force from the attacker when they're pushing through her in an attempt to get the rebound. This is just because she didn't maintain enough contact with the player on quite a number of occasions, and this is important because that's kind of the main aspect of keeping the player out. The power. If I improve the power in her legs, then it will also improve the muscular strength there as well, which will help her to kind of withstand more contact and just make her stronger. I've also want her power to improve because as she's rebounding and she jumps, she doesn't jump high off the ground, whereas if her power improved her legs, she'd be able to get much more height, and because she's a small player, the height is quite important in the jump because most other players are going to be taller than her. Actually lost the slide which shows there's another slide that was purple and had a thing in. But so this is the data from 6.3, which was force plate data. So to the right is the data received when the lab experiments were done on the player, when the player completed a run onto force plates. To the left, the points of strength are explained in green and the weaknesses in white. So from the results generated, I've calculated the standard deviation for braking forces and propulsive force, and this is how far each result differs from the mean. If the standard deviation is small, then it shows consistency in the player, whereas if the standard deviation is larger, then it shows the athlete is getting more different results from each run. And then when looking into this data for weaknesses, it is important to consider that it was completed in a lab, and therefore it's going to have a very low ecologic validity. I think the most important weakness to improve out of all of the above would be the propulsive force in her foot. This is because her braking force is large, she's slowing down more than what she's speeding up and pushing off with, and therefore she's losing quite a lot of her speed. This is going to be important in a basketball game because it could be the difference between her being able to make a break on her own in a game, have an empty goal, and then that of a defender catching up with her and overtaking her and defending her, really. Here is the table here's the data taken from the 20-meter sprint, as we did. The strengths are identified in green and the weaknesses in white. Table just also the little table below shows the standard deviation for the values in the above table. I think the most important weaknesses to improve would be the first 10 metres, because she is very inconsistent, which again could be the difference between her making a break on her own and then being caught by the defender. And I think this could be done by increasing the power in her legs, because it means that she is more dependent on that power rather than any inertia or momentum she carries when she starts the sprint. So here's a summary of all the strengths and weaknesses from each method of analysis, well, each assignment really. For the information discovered from notational analysis, the strengths of my performer were her turnovers. She got 1 turnover and the group average was 1.7. And even though this is below the group average, I'm kind of viewing it as a strength because she did not receive the ball much, and that was for no apparent reason at all other than not being passed to by the boys. So bearing this in mind, she did well to manage to get into the right position and get the timing right to get the turnover. Another strength of her performance was seen in her schematic, because it shows she kept to a particular area of the court, which is good because it shows that she has group cohesion, because she's not all over the court, and it shows she knows what area she's meant to be in, where all the other players are. And a final strength from this analysis was her passing. Again, we do have to consider she didn't have much time on the ball, but her total successful passes was above the group average. So although her total successful passes were below the group average, the amount of unsuccessful passes she had was 7, which is below the average of 8, which shows she's making less faults than most of the rest of the group. This is a strength in her performance because it shows her passing is accurate and she has little unforced errors from her passing. I'm just going to stop it here and carry on in the next one.